It's not showing too badly right now.
Thank you.
I can always tilt this up a little.
Oh, that's the way to do it.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. As often happens on Chef AJ Live, one guest is a referral from another guest. And boy, Dr. Marcia Gale, she refers amazing people to me. And today you're going to meet one of them. Her name is Dr. Shipra Bansal, and she's going to be talking about nutritional myths and facts. Please welcome her to the show. It's very nice to meet you virtually in person.
Thank you, Chef AJ. It's great to be here. It's really an honor.
Yeah, I know you have slides to share, but why don't you tell our viewers, in case they're not familiar with you, a little bit about yourself and how you found out about plant-based diets and things like that?
Yeah, sure. So actually, my story is kind of interesting because I had originally been interested in nutrition, but I ended up going to medical school. And to be honest, when I took nutrition in medical school, and I guess we were lucky to have nutrition because a lot of medical schools don't. But when I took it, it was one of my least favorite topics because I was memorizing all sorts of stuff that I really would probably never see. Actually, a lot of it I've never seen to date, even after a decade in practice. And so as I got out of training, I didn't utilize nutrition a lot in my medical practice. And honestly, I really didn't think people would change their diets even when I did advocate that. And so it just kind of was a self-fulfilling prophecy. But a couple of years into my practice, I happened to stumble on this documentary one night at our local health food store. And it was about Dr. Gabriel Cousens, who practices here in Arizona, my state, and he was reversing diabetes. So he actually documented the process of having people come stay with him for 30 days. And then he would actually, people who were on insulin for many years, he was able to get them off in a few weeks. And I have to say, I really thought he was a quack because I thought to myself, in 7 years of training, I've never seen that, never heard of that, that was never even the goal for diabetes. How is it that he could be reversing it? But he did pique my curiosity quite a bit. And so I ended up on this amazing journey where I started doing my own research. And I could not believe that this has been documented for so long, for decades and decades, and that people have been doing this all along. And so needless to say, today my practice looks entirely different, and nutrition is at the forefront, as is physical activity and healthy lifestyle. And it's so much more satisfying, and my outcomes are so much better.
That is so interesting. I do remember seeing that documentary by Dr. Cousens a long time ago.
It's an old one, yeah, but it's good.
And that's incredible. I'm so glad that you found that out. What kind of things did you learn about nutrition in medical school?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we learned about the basics, and honestly, they're really geared towards passing our board exams. So the types of basic things that we learn are, for example, vitamin C deficiency gives you scurvy, or vitamin B deficiency will give you pellagra or beriberi. But these are not things that we see here in the US, maybe in some parts around the world, but particularly now with fortification, we don't really see them. And so it's really outdated. And what we need today is more education about how do we help people, and support them in making changes to their diets. And then what is the cutting edge information about diets and different dietary patterns and the pros and cons? But unfortunately, I didn't get that.
What kind of practice do you have now?
I'm a family physician, and I work at a federally qualified health center. So my interest really is making, making nutrition and healthy lifestyle available to our underserved population. Because I think there's some more options for people who have the means, which is wonderful. But I also want to make as much as possible available to our less privileged communities.
How do you do that?
Well, actually, one of the things I love to do is group visits. And so when I started coming on, and I saw like Dr. McDougall's program, which is amazing, and Dr. Furman's program, where you go in and you actually, get to spend about 10 days with them, and you get to improve your diet. I thought, what can I do in my population to bring that to them? And obviously, we can't take them on a cruise or anything, but can there be an immersion, somewhat of an immersion that we can do? And so that's when I started looking into group visits. And for your listeners who haven't heard of that, because it's not that common, even though it's been around for at least 50 years, it's just not that common in medical practices. A group visit is when you have a medical visit, but instead of it being one-on-one with your physician, it is maybe about 10 people, somewhere around 8 to 12 people who might be looking to make similar changes, and they all have a visit together with their physician. What I love about group visits is that it really helps people support each other. And when you're trying to change your behavior, like your diet, that is what's the most important. And so what we did, to answer your question, is try to create as much of an immersion within the group visit model, where we bring in food. We actually always have meals and recipes. We talk about how do you change your diet if your kids won't eat this way, or your spouse won't eat this way, or what do you do at those family gatherings? And so we really started bringing in behavior change. We tried to get family members to join together, and we tried to get peer support as much as possible over a course of about 7 to 9 weeks.
How do you change your diet when your family doesn't want to support you, whether it's husband or children? What do you advise your patients to do?
Yeah, so that's always the toughest question. And so what we do is we advocate, well, first of all, we try to, before the class even starts, we get people to just talk to their family members and let their family members know that there's no pressure on the family, but that, hey, I need to do this for myself. And would you be able to support me in allowing me to, maybe make my own meals, or to adjust the way we do meals, and see where the rest of the family is at. And so first of all is kind of that step. And then secondly, especially, a lot of times the spouse doesn't want to eat that way, and that's fine. They shouldn't have to. And so if they don't, then we talk about making a main dish, not cooking 2 meals, because that is so hard and that's such a barrier for our patients, but making the main dish, the vegetable-based or the plant-based dish, but having sides that would be, that would offer an opportunity for family members. And then same thing for kids. The thing with kids is I think the more you push them, the more they're going to be like, no, I don't want this. But if you just offer them without saying anything, you make it an option, they'll start to pick and choose and try some things. For people who can, we also suggest, like, if you can get your kids involved in the process of making your meal, or growing or buying the food, or whatever it is, however much they can be a part of that process, they'll be more likely to be excited about it. But you know what? Some people are just not there, and that's okay. And we try to just build as much support for the participant, while keeping it open to family.
Yeah, group visits actually sound kind of fun when you think about it.
Yeah, actually, I think they are, a one-on-one visit is great. If you have an infection, you need an antibiotic, you want to get in, get out, and be done. But when you're really trying to make some substantial changes to your lifestyle, it's really important to have that support system. And actually, our participants really love it. And I have to say, I love it too. I am always energized because I'm so inspired.
What kind of changes have you seen in your patient population?
Oh my goodness. So we've been doing this now for probably about, 6 years. And amazing changes. I mean, so the group visits are open to anybody, in particular, people who are interested in, working on their diabetes, their cholesterol, high blood pressure. Those are the main areas that people usually come in for group visits. And what we've seen is that some people come in saying, well, I'm never going plant-based. I'm just here to support my spouse, or I'm just here to, to learn more, but I'm not going to do this. And that's absolutely fine. But what we see is that people just make shifts, and all of that is helpful. All of that improves health, and it's been documented really well. Other people from day one. We don't even ask people to like make huge changes. We kind of have them go step by step. But some people from day one, they absolutely go all the way through. So in terms of outcomes, the majority of our participants who have prediabetes will get rid of their diabetes within 7 weeks because we do labs before and after so they can see the difference. Many people have gotten off their statins. The other thing is that many people start seeing is that their energy increases. And for example, I had at one point somebody who worked on the railroads. I'm in Flagstaff, we're a big railroad town. So somebody was working on the railroads and would go off, along the railroad for days at a time. But he had a super supportive wife who would prepare all the meals and stuff. And by the end, he said that he had so many joint aches and pains from his work. And he thought he was just getting old. He was in his early 40s, and that was osteoarthritis, and that was just how it's going to be. But by the end of the class, not only was he totally off his statin and had a perfectly normal cholesterol, but he also was pain-free. And so those are the types of stories that we see.
That is fantastic. 7 weeks to get rid of your diabetes. Sounds good to me.
Yeah. So it can be really powerful. And I think that's what's inspiring too. And that's what we really push is that your body absolutely wants to heal. And we're here to help you support it in healing. And that even if you've had this for years, you really can see significant differences.
Do you ever recommend that your patients either read books or watch some of the documentaries?
Absolutely, 100%. And so the reason what we say is that, look, you're getting messages from everywhere to eat unhealthy, right? You're getting messages on TV, on billboards, on commercials, everywhere. No wonder it's so hard, right? And then those foods are super addictive the way that they are produced. And so what we have to do to counter all of that messaging and to build the right messaging for us is to immerse ourselves as much as possible. So we absolutely give out lists of documentaries. We make them available, books, podcasts, such as, shows like yours. As we provide recipe books. Every week we have food, like a full meal, and then we provide recipes for that. And for our population, we make sure that the meal is less than $3 per serving. And so that we can, really convey to our patients that this is doable even on a budget.
Right. I think that's where there's a big misconception that plant-based eating is expensive. But if you get down to basics like beans and rice, potatoes, sweet potatoes, it's really not.
No, it's very doable. And I think that's what, one of the weeks we do a shopping tour as well, where we go through and we really go through the supermarket and we talk about, okay, now if you're on a budget, how are you going to do this? And what is it that you can buy? And really, like canned beans, are they okay? They're cheap, they're easy, they're fast if you don't have time. And that, yes, if you just watch for the sodium, they're still super healthy. And so we really try to put that in there to give people as much support and making sure they can meet their budgetary needs as well.
Great. I know you have some slides. Did you want to share them? And
sure. Why don't we get started?
Like myth or fact?
Yes.
You said that, guys. Dr. Bansal is going to ask some questions, and please type in the chat box whether you think what she says is a myth or a fact.
Sorry, started at the wrong end. Okay, yes. So I thought we would just kind of make it a little bit fun and interactive. So please, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to speak up or type them in. All right, so just in general, no disclosures. And just to get us started, that is a fact. So I'm gonna now turn it over to the audience. This first one says, poor diet is the #2 risk factor for premature death in the United States. Is that a myth or a fact?
Okay, can I guess too?
Absolutely, although you probably know.
Well, I would think it's #1, so I wonder if it's a trick question, but let's see. Guys, myth or fact? Type it in now. Fact. Candy says fact, Cindy says fact. Everybody's saying fact.
Okay, well, it turns out that it absolutely is a myth. And Chef AJ, you had it right. It is our number one reason for death in this country. And what's surprising, this was actually published just a few years ago in the Journal of the American Medical Association. Now, dietary risk is the number one cause, surpassing tobacco, which has been our number one cause of death for years and years and years. And so it's unfortunate, but I think the urgency has never been more than it is now. And what you'll notice on that graph is the kind of darker blue shade on dietary risks here. That corresponds to cardiovascular. And cardiovascular death or cardiovascular disease is the number one cause of death. And behind that is our diet. In fact, the World Health Organization says that 80% of heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes, and 40% of cancer could be prevented, primarily with improvements to diet and lifestyle. So the second one is, what about soy intake? Can soy intake cause breast cancer in women and breast development in men?
I'll let the audience, that one I know because Dr. Barnard talks about that a lot, but I'll see what the audience says.
Okay.
Just takes it, the chat is just a little bit of a delay. Come on, guys, myth or fact? It's like truth or dare, but myth or fact. Myth, myth, myth. That's what I vote too. Well, I think it's protective.
Yes, kudos to your audience. That's amazing. Great. I put this one in there because there's so much in the media. So, and I say mostly myth because actually that rumor is built on a little bit of fact. And it's based on 2 case studies. So here's one. This one is it was a 60-year-old male who reported gynecomastia, or growth of breasts, for the last 6 months, decreased libido, and erectile dysfunction. And his lab work showed that he actually had elevated estrogen levels in his blood. And when they took his history, they found out that he was drinking soy milk, but he was drinking quite a bit of soy milk. In fact, he was drinking over a gallon a day. So it's mostly a myth. If you keep a moderate level of soy intake, it is absolutely protective. But if you go over a gallon, yes, it can cause problems.
Wow, that's a lot of, that's just a lot of non-dairy milk a day, a gallon, I think.
Yeah, it was, I think it was 5 liters or something. It was really a lot. So here's some of the facts. Soy intake, which is studied as whole or minimally processed soy product in childhood, adolescence, and adult life, all confer protection against the development of breast cancer. And what's more interesting is that soy intake amongst women with active breast cancer is associated with decreased mortality as well as decreased recurrence. And this is true for both estrogen receptor positive as well as negative cancers. At the same time, soy has been shown to decrease uterine and ovarian cancer risk, improve bone health, and menopausal symptoms. So no controversy, even though the mainstream media sometimes seems to play it up that there is, the research is very clear. Now, is there a safe limit? Because we did talk about that case. Higher intakes of soy products have been shown to increase a level of a hormone called IGF-1. That's insulin-like growth factor 1. And this hormone is strongly associated with cancer risk. When people have high intakes of meat, their IGF-1 levels are higher. And we've actually associated that quite strongly with prostate, breast, and colorectal cancer. So taking high levels of soy can also do that. Studies indicate that 3 servings of soy a day do not increase the risk of cancer, and studies looking at 5 or more servings a day do show an increased level. So what I would say for your listeners is up to 3 servings a day, absolutely safe. And, that's, you probably don't want more than that anyway. You want to have a variety of foods in your diet. Okay, so the next one now is plants can be a better source of calcium than dairy. Is that a fact or a myth?
Fact. I bet it's more utilizable. Yep, truth. Camilla says truth. You could say truth or fact. Chrissy,
Sure.
fact. I got a smart audience. Leah says fat. Oh, look at
Yeah.
all. Wish we
Really smart audience.
could give them prizes.
Yeah, very nice. Great job. So yes, and the answer here, the really the thing that you want to look at here is your source of calcium in terms of calcium per calorie, right? And I think of this as like value. If you're going to go out and buy a car, you want as much car as you can get for every dollar you spend. That's value. Similarly, for every calorie that you eat, you want to maximize your nutrient intake. And so when it comes to calcium, you want to really take a look at how much calcium your food has per calorie of intake, because calorie now becomes your currency. So here we are looking at several different types of foods and comparing them to cow's milk. And so you'll see cow's milk has almost 3 grams per calorie, or I think it's probably 100 calories, but the density is almost 3. And if you look at several other foods, they actually have the equivalent or more. And those are the ones that have the 2 stars by them. So for example, your bok choy is pretty high, kale, mustard greens. So your greens actually are pretty good in calcium. And then your spinach and tofu, and then the yogurt at the bottom. So, but the magic question, or the really key question, is what you brought up, Chef AJ, is how absorbable is this calcium, right? So we really want to take a look at absorption. And now with cow's milk, you can see that, absorption is about 32%. But the ones that have the 2 stars, again, have equal or greater absorption than cow's milk, if we're going to use that as the baseline. And so the foods, for example, bok choy, which has very high calcium density, but also almost twice as much absorption, is going to be a really, really strong source of calcium. Now, if you go back down here to the spinach has a lot of calcium, but because it's a high oxalate green, its absorption is quite low. It's only 5% compared to 32% for cow's milk. So it is not a good source of calcium in terms of what really gets absorbed and utilized in your body. So you want to look for the ones that have both columns with the stars, and those are going to be your best sources of calcium. Now, animal foods are associated with a higher excretion of calcium in the urine as well. And so there's a lot of different ways we think about calcium balance, and so we want to keep that in mind. The reason I really promote leafy greens as such a great source of calcium is because they're also a great source of vitamin K. Some of our best sources of vitamin K are leafy greens. And vitamin K is associated with increased bone mineral density. So it's kind of like a double duo, really. When you eat leafy greens, you're getting that good calcium. If it's not high oxalate, you're getting good absorption. And then you're also getting the vitamin K right there packed in with it. Greens are calcium-rich sources without the added saturated fat and cholesterol present in dairy products. Okay, so here's our next one. Olive oil reduces heart disease.
There are some people that are doctors that will get this one wrong, but
well, I'm trying to be a little tricky, so let's see here.
I'm seeing myth from Candy, myth from Leah, false from Carol. So far, it's all myth. Mandy, Chrissy, Colleen.
Perfect. I can't stump your audience. So.
It's a little bit tricky, actually, because
this one was. So, and actually it's relative. So I'm going to talk about this because I think, many of us, like our friends and family, probably also say like, well, I read about this and I read about that, right? So actually olive oil, you can say olive oil reduces heart disease if you're talking relatively. Many times like this, I just pulled this off of a website, we'll hear comments like this: include healthier fats in your diet to help reduce the risk of heart disease. And what the research shows is that using unsaturated fats instead of saturated fats reduces our total and LDL cholesterol. And our LDL cholesterol is that bad cholesterol, right? So if we have a lot of saturated fat in our diet and we substitute it and move towards the unsaturated, yes, that is going to protect us against heart disease. Now we know that the bad cholesterol is increased by two things in particular. One is saturated fat, and the second one is cholesterol, direct cholesterol intake that we get from animal products. Now that's not as powerful as the amount of saturated fat we take, but it does contribute. The second thing is that LDL is decreased by soluble fiber. So that's the kind of fiber you get in oats and a lot of grains, but fruits and vegetables in general. And then also the sterols and stanols. And that's something like Benefiber that you get, people buy it as a product because it has these plant analogs to cholesterol. So instead of animal cholesterol, it's like plant cholesterol. But what it does is, because it's a different compound, but similar, it's related, it actually kind of prevents our body from absorbing the animal cholesterol, and it kind of like, it gets in the way a little bit. And so it actually prevents, it can lower our LDL. So what we see is that unsaturated fats are healthier than saturated fats, but just adding them to your diet does not improve cardiovascular health. And the reason I put this out there is because I've had friends that have said, oh, my cholesterol, I found out my cholesterol was high, and so I added some almonds to my diet because almonds are good for cholesterol. Yes, they are good if you switch them out instead of your saturated fats, but I wouldn't just add extra unsaturated fats in order to reduce your total cholesterol. And then this kind of, I think your audience probably is pretty good at this too, but this is just a chart and some studies that have looked at the kind of relative impact of different fats in diet. And so on here, on the y-axis here, we've got like mortality rates. And so we all know trans fat causes the most death, and then saturated fat. But what I wanted to really point out here is that when we talk about the unsaturated fats, we've got monounsaturated, which is where your olive oil comes in, and then polyunsaturated, which are things like your flax and your chia and your walnuts. And so we see that when you substitute monounsaturated fat for saturated fat, there's a big reduction in mortality. But when you actually substitute to the polyunsaturated fat, it is really huge. In fact, just substituting 5% of your calories from saturated fat to polyunsaturated will reduce your mortality risk by about 25%. So very significant. Okay, so next one is people with diabetes can reduce their blood sugar levels by eating a high carbohydrate diet.
Guys know this. There's a little bit of a lag between when you speak and when they type, but they were saying it. Fact, truth.
Yeah, we got it. Great. So yes, absolutely a fact. And so these are just a little bit of things. So what would you say for celery? Is that a high carb food or a low carb food?
Well, it's a non-starchy vegetable, so I think it's a low carb food.
Yeah, and well, when we look at it, and if you were to, if on your celery there was a food label, it would show that 73% of the calories are coming from carbohydrates. And so yes, you were right, Chef AJ, but if we look at the total carb content, it's actually pretty high. What about white bread?
High.
Absolutely, but actually not as high in carbs as a celery. And then finally, apple with its skin.
Wow.
I'm curious what your audience will say about that one.
What are you guys saying? They're going, HMMM. It's interesting. High carb.
It's a high carb food. 96% of all the calories come from carbohydrates. But then if we take a look and say, well, which one's going to increase the blood sugar the most, right? I have a feeling your audience in particular unanimously will say white bread, of course, right? So what we find out is that it's the carbohydrate breakdown. All of these are relatively high carb foods, actually, but it's the different types of carbohydrates. So it's the different types of sugars that impact how blood sugar responds. And fiber is actually a carbohydrate. So when in the mass media, they always say, well, I need to eat low carb. That's a real misnomer, because fiber is a carbohydrate, and you absolutely want rich sources of fiber in your diet. And then other nutrients can also modulate how your blood sugar responds. And so if we were to break down all three of these foods, you'll notice that, celery is almost half of it is fiber. So, and fiber is a carbohydrate. So it is a high carbohydrate food, but because it's so much fiber, it doesn't increase our sugars. Now, and then the white bread, by contrast, has very little fiber. So that makes it more likely to raise sugars. At the same time, when you look at the apple, it has 82% sugar in it, but half of this sugar is fructose and half is glucose. And it's only glucose that raises our blood sugar. Fructose is actually is digested totally differently in our body. It goes to our liver first, and it does not raise our blood sugar. So the idea, the bottom line here, my point in this question is, when people say high carb, low carb food, or carbohydrates make my sugar go high, it is such a oversimplification of what a carbohydrate is, and doesn't take into account how different carbohydrates react differently in the body, that it becomes meaningless. And so we really want to be talking about refined carbohydrates as being more of a problem rather than carbohydrates. So the next question is then, well, what about fruits for people with diabetes? Are they okay? Most fruit actually have a low to medium glycemic index due to their fructose and fiber content. So people with diabetes want to make sure to eat their fruit with the skin as much as possible. And because there's so much, half of it about is fructose, it is not going to increase your blood sugar. Overall studies even show that healthy individuals who eat more fruit are less likely to develop type 2 diabetes. So eating more fruit protects you from developing diabetes later on in your life. Most whole fruit is safe to eat in those with type 2 diabetes and provides significant health benefits, all of those extra phytonutrients and antioxidants that we all need. Now, you want to have moderation with pineapple and dried fruit and some of those fruit that are higher in the glycemic index. But in general, fruit is a very safe thing to eat for people with diabetes. Because of the health benefits, the American Diabetes Association recommends people with diabetes eat the same amount of fruit as those who do not have diabetes. And that's not a very well-known fact, that even the ADA does recommend this. All right, so I'm going to move on to our next question about agave. In agave, a low glycemic sweetener is a safe alternative to sugar, especially for people with diabetes. Is that a fact or a myth?
Well, that's a trick question, because it is low glycemic, but I'm not sure it's really that safe. So they're saying myth, myth, myth. So far, it's all myth.
A myth. Okay, so absolutely, it is low glycemic, and this is how it's put out in the it's advertised, right? As organic, agave, natural, right? It's made from the agave plant, but actually, it is a myth. You do not want to be using agave. And the reason for this is agave, as much as it is promoted as being natural, as being this like sweetener that's been used for centuries, is a highly processed sweetener. In fact, it's so processed that it is 95 to 99% fructose. So you're taking this sweetener and just concentrating it unbelievably. And just to give you a comparison, there's so much controversy about high fructose corn syrup, right? High fructose corn syrup is about 55% fructose. But agave, you're looking at 95+%. So this is too concentrated. And what we see is when people switch from regular sweeteners to agave, it causes the triglycerides or the fat in their blood to go high, and it actually causes fatty liver. And fatty liver actually worsens insulin resistance, which is a big component of type 2 diabetes. So long-term, short-term, if you check your blood sugar, yes, it'll be better, but long-term, it's actually going to make the whole process worse. And it's also a high caloric sweetener. So it has 21 calories per tablespoon compared to 16 calories for sugar. So absolutely do not want to use agave. Now the fructose, so some people might be asking, well, the fructose in fruit, you said it was safe. Absolutely safe. At those doses, at those levels, very safe. Nobody gets fatty liver from eating too much fruit because there's also fiber, there's all sorts of other nutrients in it. It's just when we concentrate it to this level that our body does not know how to handle it, and it just accumulates and causes this fatty liver. All right, so I think we're almost done. We've got maybe two more. So the next one is coconut oil. Does coconut oil increase your LDL or your bad cholesterol levels?
People are saying they love this game. They wish we could play it more often. That's great. They're saying fact. Candy and Mandy. And Lissa, we've got one myth from Danny, but most people are saying truth.
Yeah, and this one is really hard because there's so much promotion of coconut oil, right? As a medium chain triglyceride. The MCT oil is supposed to be a lot healthier than our other oils. So actually, this one is a fact. Coconut oil does increase your bad cholesterol. So let's take a look at it in a little bit more detail. Now, this one is just a graph showing the different fat breakdowns of different oils. So for example, here on the top, we've got safflower oil. The red is saturated fat, and then the blue is your monounsaturated fat. So safflower oil has very little saturated fat. Whereas if you go down to your coconut oil, you can see all the way down, it is mostly saturated fat. In fact, just to give you a sense of perspective, if you look here, lard is about maybe 40% saturated fat, butter maybe about 60%, but coconut oil far surpasses all of these other types of oils in terms of saturated fat. So very heavy. And remember, we were talking about how unsaturated fats are healthier than saturated fats. And just a point on this, maybe that you're of interest to your audience, is that a lot of times these days, we are trying to get away from hydrogenated oils, but what we're doing is we are putting palm oil in a lot of our foods and palm kernel oil. But if you notice, both of those are highly saturated fats as well. And so you really don't want to buy peanut butter that says no stir. And it's the reason it's no stir is because they put all this palm or palm kernel oil in there, making it really solid and preventing the oil from floating to the top. Okay, so just a side, but just to kind of drive home, coconut oil is one of the highest in saturated fat. And yes, we've known for a long time that it does increase LDL levels. You can see it increases it actually at the same level of beef fat, and safflower oil does too, actually, but more than safflower oil. But safflower oil will also increase your LDL. So at the same time, it's still thought to be healthy because it's a medium chain triglyceride. And it's also been said to increase our good cholesterol, the HDL. So that is true. Medium chain triglycerides have some health benefits. For example, they have some antiviral benefits. That's based mostly on animal studies, but they are known to have some of those properties that the other saturated fats don't have. It does increase the good HDL cholesterol. And there was a lot of excitement around increasing HDL cholesterol about a decade ago. But now the newer studies have really shown, kind of cast doubt on the importance of increasing HDL. So this one coconut oil will increase both your bad and your good cholesterol, but actually we really don't know if that is even important, that it, or of any significance that it increases the good cholesterol. But increasing the bad cholesterol is the number one indicator or predictor for heart disease. Okay, so this is our last one. And so people eating plant-based diets should make sure they eat complementary proteins together. Is that a fact or a myth?
Oh, I know, because there was a book that had to be retracted because of this by Frances Moore Lapay.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, everybody's got this one. Myth, false.
Okay, awesome. I don't think I tricked your audience even once. Really great. Okay, so yes, absolutely a myth. And the idea here is that there's all these amino acids, and then they get stringed together and they get turned into different structures to form proteins. And Frances Moore Lapay, like you said, was a very, a good researcher, but she came up with this idea that because plant proteins are not complete, they don't have all of those essential amino acids like animal proteins do, that we have to then be careful and we have to eat certain foods together. And this was a really predominant theory, probably into the 1980s, 1990s for sure, that people were pushing. It turns out that actually we are highly adept at breaking down proteins into amino acids and maintaining a rich pool to build any type of protein that we need. And so we do not need to worry about making sure we mix and match our foods in order to make sure we have all of those essential amino acids. And if you think about it, the animals that we eat, such as cows, sheep, or chickens, have complete proteins, but they all obtain those essential amino acids from the plants they eat. So they're able to take these incomplete proteins and then assimilate them. Very similarly, we are able to do the same. In fact, it is almost impossible to have a protein deficiency if one is eating enough calories. And so that picture there is basically the number of patients I've seen who have come in for a protein deficiency who are eating enough calories. I've never seen it. We don't see it in the hospital. Unless somebody is truly not eating enough, so they're just calorie deficient in general, then they are at risk. But if you're eating adequate calories, reasonably varied diet, it would be almost impossible to have a protein deficiency. So that's it for my show and game. And hopefully there was a couple of new things for your audience in there.
Wouldn't that be cool if there was a plant-based game show, myth or fact? I'd love it. You could be the host.
Oh, that would be really fun.
Yeah, people are so obsessed with protein. It's incredible.
Yes, absolutely. And now it's become the pea protein, right? The plant-based proteins that people are getting so into. And while I think they are better in terms of the protein package, and what I mean about protein package is that, they don't come with the associated cholesterol and saturated fat that animal sources oftentimes do. We are still, as a society, we're getting way too much protein. And that's really a concern as well. And one thing, if I could add, Chef AJ, that I think a lot of people don't realize is that, a lot of times we talk about carbs turning into fat in our body, but our bodies are so good at storing energy, and it makes sense because evolutionarily we needed to, is that we can store any type of macronutrient as fat, and that includes proteins. So if we're taking in excess protein calories that we don't need or we can't use, our body just stores them as fat too. Or it tries to get rid of it, which pushes it through our kidney, because all proteins are broken down through the kidney. And so we really want to be careful that we don't get too much protein. And most of us in the US get 2 to 3 times as much protein as we need.
Yeah, that's, like you say, I don't know anyone that has had a protein deficiency that has had enough calories.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing is people, particularly people having like working out, or if you're active and having protein powder, our bodies can only metabolize and use about 20 to 30 grams of protein at a time. And so if we do a protein shake and maybe we're taking 50 grams of protein, that's 20 extra grams that's going to go nowhere. It's either going to be an extra burden on our body or it gets turned into fat.
It's funny because I at one point I was seeing this trainer, and because I had a torn rotator cuff, and he was like, really concerned about my protein. So he had me write down everything I ate. And it's like, no matter what, I couldn't not get enough protein. Like this was from May, but I mean, just eating things like blackberries, broccoli, sweet potatoes. I mean, like every meal was like over 25 grams of protein without trying to get protein, just eating what I eat. And, it's incredible,
It's really surprising. Actually, it's kind of funny. In our group visits, we do this little activity where we get a daily menu that's just very high in carbohydrates, and we don't include any soy product, any beans, any nuts, any seeds. And we ask people to estimate how much protein is in that menu. And it's always surprising, just off of, right, like oatmeal for breakfast, a vegetable stir fry with some rice, for lunch, and maybe a couple snacks, you're going to end up getting the protein that you need. And so it's really not something that we need to worry about.
Exactly, because I can't eat beans and I don't eat nuts, and I still get enough protein. Go figure.
It's really amazing. Yeah.
And you think about all the large animals like the elephant. Nobody's asking them where they're getting their protein.
Right, like a rhinoceros or a hippopotamus or elephants. I mean, incredibly strong, amazing musculature, and yeah, all plant-based.
Yep, let's see. I'm seeing if there's any questions in the chat that I might have missed. Well, here is avocado oil better than coconut oil? So this might be a newer viewer to me, because we're not fans of any kind of processed foods, especially oils.
Yeah, and you know what? I get that question all the time. So I agree. I also agree with you, Chef AJ, that oils are processed foods. And the reason I say that is because the oil is really the fat that's just taken from a food and extracted and purified so much that you've really taken out pretty much every other nutrient except for some vitamin E maybe, and left it as fat. And that it's very similar or analogous to a sugar cube in my mind. Because a sugar cube, you started with maybe sugar cane, and then you took out only the carbohydrates and you left everything else behind. And that's a sugar cube. And similarly with oils, you've just taken out the fat and left everything behind, which changes the way it's metabolized in our body. And regardless of the type of oil, whether it's avocado oil or coconut oil or even that safflower oil that's very low in saturated fat, a tablespoon is 120 calories. And so you want to be careful, regardless of the type of oil or the type of fat, it's going to be 120 calories per tablespoon. Now, over the last 50 years, when there's analyses done on as a country, on our intake, the number one increase in caloric intake has been vegetable oils. We've actually increased our total calories by about 25% over the last 50 years. And the number one reason is vegetable oils that are put into foods. So that's kind of the foundation or the basis for why I'd be careful about oils or use them really minimally if you're going to use them. Now, if you're going to use a tablespoon of some sort of oil, would I recommend avocado oil over coconut oil? I would say yes, because avocado oil is rich in the monounsaturated. It's richer in a monounsaturated fat, and coconut oil is rich in the saturated fat. And so I'd still be very careful, even though it's a medium chain triglyceride, I still think that saturated fat is potent at increasing our bad cholesterol. And I would rather have you do avocado.
So there's a question, why is keto so popular, you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would love to have a better answer on this, but I think I feel like when it comes to diet, we want to hear what seems feasible to us. And I think keto can give quick results. So people often, when you get into ketosis, it takes a couple of days, right? 2 to 3 days. But once you're in ketosis, you lose weight quickly. Now, it's not healthy weight loss, right? You're losing water weight. So you're becoming kind of dehydrated, but you lose it quickly. And oftentimes people in our society, I think, looks for quick fixes, right? So I think that's part of the reason. The second part of the reason is I'm like, gosh, it just sounds like for a society that's been dieting and dieting and dieting for decades and decades, and we've been on the low fat kick and then the low carb kick, and so all these restrictions. But on keto, you feel like, wow, I can eat all these foods that I was told I was never supposed to eat, and I can lose weight. So I think there's an allure there that is just kind of like, yeah, it speaks to that side of us that is like, this is really what I want to hear. And this, I feel like I can do this. But unfortunately, we now have some good studies that are showing that these low carb diets are really not, they, in terms of, yes, for weight loss, they're as effective as any other diet, but for your metabolic health, they are not good. And we see increased mortality with diets like the keto diet.
Right. Well, it may be good for weight loss, but how sustainable is a keto diet? Our body thrives on carbohydrates. So it just sounds like a horrible way to eat.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I feel like even just for some people seem to do okay on it, but many people, when they're in ketosis, you can tell because they're grumpy. They're really not happy. The brain loves using glucose. And when we deprive it of glucose, we actually I see a lot of shifts in people in terms of their mood. One thing I wanted to add on keto diet as well that maybe your listeners are already aware of, but some of the studies that are coming out are showing that people who are on keto diets actually lose muscle mass. And that's because our bodies will burn glucose or carbohydrates first as their preferred source, and then secondly, proteins, and then finally fat. And so people who are on a keto diet have to be 70 to 75% at least of their calories fat. And they have to keep their protein calories relatively moderate to low, because otherwise the body will not stay in ketosis. But what we're starting to see with some of the research coming out now is that people are losing muscle mass as a way, as the body, looks to burn calories for fuel. And so that's a real concern as well.
Yep. So there's 2 questions on stevia, one from Lissa. What are your feelings on it? And Karen says, which is better, sugar or stevia? I say neither. My mentor, Dr. Goldhammer, says, just because something's less bad doesn't mean it's good.
Yes, right. And I think that's the key in nutrition. It's all relative. It's all relative. So in terms of stevia is a 0-calorie sweetener. It is highly processed. And so clearly, obviously, it didn't come from the plant, right, in that white powder form or in that liquid form that we get in the store. However, that being said, there were a lot of studies, I think in the 70s-ish, that showed that stevia might actually cause cancer in rats. And so there was this big scare around stevia. And what they later on found out is that there is an enzyme in rats that converts the stevia into a cancer-causing compound. Humans, however, do not have that enzyme. And so for humans, in terms of what the science is showing, it is not a carcinogen at moderate doses. I wouldn't use it as your exclusive sweetener, but I think in moderation was absolutely, there's no research to show a concern. Now, that being said, it is still highly processed. It is not nutritive in any form. And so you might consider, for example, date sugar as a sweetener, because date sugar is still a whole food and it still contains all of the vitamins, minerals, and fiber of a date. It's not as sweet. Stevia is very, very sweet, right? It's something like 300 or 400 times as sweet as sugar. But it could be an alternative that you use. And then the second question was stevia compared to sugar. Was that right?
Which is better?
Yeah, that's a hard one to say. I I think that we still need more research on stevia. I have seen some initial studies that show that even though stevia is non-caloric, that some people, when you measure their sugar levels 2 or 3 days out, they actually are no lower than if you had a sugar cube. But I think that that's very, it's kind of new research. I don't know that it's been confirmed at all. So I feel like I can't say that I feel like we don't have enough information to say which is better.
When you do your group visits, do you do any cooking, like teaching patients how to cook?
Yeah, we actually, so we have to do it within the clinic setting, and we don't have a kitchen. I would love to have a kitchen. But what we do is we get an induction stovetop and we just do demos. And so we show patients how to water saute. We do green smoothies in a blender. So we'll do different demos. And someday, if we have a kitchen, then it would be really awesome to actually be able to cook together.
Do you cook a lot for yourself? Do you use an Instant Pot?
I do. So actually, I don't use an Instant Pot. I grew up, so I'm from India, and I grew up in India. Households always have a pressure cooker. I grew up with the old style, the scary style pressure cooker that can blow in your face, but it's what I've always used. I know the sound of the whistle, like just, without even thinking about it. So I have 3 pressure cookers, and I use them all the time.
That is so cool. What about an air fryer? Do you have one of those?
I do not. It's one of those things that looks really interesting, but I haven't invested in it yet.
Do you keep your meals fairly simple? What kind of foods do you eat on a daily basis?
Yeah, sure. It's a bit of a mix. I cook some Indian food. I cook just a lot of greens. So I don't really like salads actually. And so as I was transitioning my diets, and I would always see like, eat salads, eat salads. I just used to look at that and be like, that's not me. I'm not going to eat a ton. But I love warm cooked foods. And so usually I'll do a lot of stir fries. I'll do kale stir fries. For a while I was doing a lot of bok choy, usually pretty much any green collards. We'll do a lot of that. And then I will also incorporate, I've really adapted a lot of our Indian foods so that they are, because Indian cooking is very high in oil actually. And so we've adapted a lot of it to take out all of the oil. And now one of my hobbies is actually Indian desserts and making them whole foods plant-based.
Oh, we'll have you come back and do a cooking demo. That would be fun to see an Indian dessert.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Are you a member of the ICLM?
Yes, actually, I am. And so I got certified a couple of years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago. So I'm a diplomat of the ACLM. And yeah, and actually now I'm working with them on a very exciting project. So aside from my clinical practice, I teach at a medical school, and I'm really trying to bring lifestyle medicine into our curriculum. And so many of your listeners are probably familiar with lifestyle medicine, but it's a kind of new and growing area in medicine that looks not only at nutrition, but at physical activity, sleep, mindfulness, social connectedness, and avoiding risky substances. And so I'm really inspired to bring lifestyle medicine into the medical school curricula so that doctors of tomorrow can be better prepared for a chronic disease crisis and really have some tools to help patients in meaningful ways.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Mary says, how do you flavor your stir fry?
Oh, so lots of different ways, but I guess my go-to always is a little bit of salt and lemon. And I just, and you can add pepper. That would be probably the main way.
Nice. Well,
and I'm sorry, garlic, always garlic.
You got, onion and garlic. I don't know how people live without onion and garlic.
I agree.
They are like, I don't know. I just can't, when people can't have them for whatever reason, low FODMAP, I'm like, I don't know how to make food taste good without them. I just don't.
Yeah, that is really true. And hopefully even low FODMAPs, people can bring them in after a little bit, but I agree. I think those are key. And ginger, for me, ginger is huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have time in your busy practice to make time for exercise or other fun endeavors?
Yes, Actually, as I get older, I have to say exercise is no more a luxury. It is an absolute necessity in my life. So yeah, it's not about making time. It's just, it has to happen. And I just feel so much better. And I have I tend to sit a lot for my job as well. And I definitely notice if I don't move, I absolutely feel it. And so now I even have an app on my phone that reminds me every half an hour to get up and move and just, go to the restroom, get a drink, something. And so I try to not only go for walks, but try to keep moving through the day so I don't have hours of uninterrupted sitting.
I've heard of this thing called walking with a doc. Have you heard of that? That sounds really cool.
Yes, absolutely. It is a great program. And we haven't done it at our clinic yet, but I know a lot of people who've done it at their clinics, and it's super popular. Walk with the Doc was actually started where a physician was trying to get her patients to, be more physically active. And then she just started meeting them once a month or once a week at a local park. And patients loved it. And you get time with your provider and you can ask whatever questions you want, and it's just fun and social. And so now I know there's chapters all over the country.
Oh yeah, that is so cool. I'd love to go walking with one of my doctors. Gina says, what a great guest. Can she be a regular Chef AJ? Well, we'll have to ask her, but if she'd like to come back, we'd love to have her back.
Absolutely. I'd love to. Thank you.
So obviously you practice in Arizona, but do you ever see patients virtually? If somebody wanted to see you, do you do any kind of coaching or virtual medicine?
Yeah, the rules on virtual visits are really changing now. So during the pandemic, things opened up quite a bit, and now they are shutting down again. And so physicians actually have to be licensed in the state that they practice in. And so, for example, outside of Arizona, I don't have a license to practice, and I would not be able to see anyone. I actually usually have worked only within a clinic setting. I don't have my own personal practice. So I don't have any setup for insurance or anything like that. And so that might be a little bit difficult, but I'm always really happy to refer and to help people find a provider in their area or within their system that could work for them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Well, I'd love for you to come back and show us, because, when I think of Indian food, I don't really think desserts so much.
Yeah, well, I mean, the desserts are so rich. They're good, but they are rich. And so it's been really fun to try to come up with unique and different ways to get that same flavor.
Well, that is something we look forward to seeing. Thank you so much. It's been so nice getting to know you. You're very kind of calm, very nice energy.
Thank you. This is lovely. Thank you for having me on.
And this is so great. I love this idea of myth or fact. This is fun. We get the audience involved, and maybe somehow we can award prizes in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, actually, at our school, it's really fun. We actually get our medical students to cook meals. So we give them patient cases, and then we teach them about healthy nutrition, and then we get them to cook a meal. And then if they for the winners, we actually give them an apron, and they get like a little culinary champion, and it's a lot of fun.
That's so cool. Cook with a doc, walk with a doc, and now game show with a doc. We got it all covered.
It sounds like a plan.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Bansal.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when we have another guest who's a fabulous doctor. His name is Dr. Timothy Trader. Take care. Bye.